If you are struggling with plateaus, or if you're just not as big as you want to be, you're probably not taking your accessories nearly as serious as you do your compounds. Many of us are overly informed on how to progress on our compound exercises, but how do we progress on the exercises that, for one, you can't add a lot of weight to, and two, adding weight is incredibly difficult? And the answer is really quite simple. You don't only have to add weight to make progress. What's going on, YouTube? It has been a while. I've just been busy with school, with work, and actually an appearance on America's Got Talent. We all know that if you want to maximally build a muscle, you have to isolate that muscle, and any exercise that you do has to make tangible progress. The most common form of progression that you'll find on YouTube is going to be double progression or dynamic double progression. And these are very useful methods and the base of the information I'm going to be providing you today. But you have to understand that there are levels to how you progress your accessories. Level 1 is adding reps, level 2 is adding sets, level 3 is using intensity methods, and level 4 is adding or changing the exercises in your program. First and foremost, level 1, adding reps. This should be the base of what you do. This should be done at every stage of training. This should be done with all exercises in your program. Trying to beat the books is one of the best ways to make sure that you're actually making progress. In my opinion, most of your bodybuilding work should be done within rep ranges, and your job is to fill them out in some type of systematic, reasonable way. You should be doing your reps either close to failure, to failure, or even beyond failure. And these rep ranges will depend on the exercise and you as a lifter, but the most common rep ranges that you'll see in most programs and in all of my programs are going to be things like the 5 to 10 rep range, the 8 to 12 rep range, the 10 to 15 rep range. And these rep ranges are often segmented in somewhat arbitrary ways, but it is mainly to provide you with progression indicators. In the case of double progression, you add weight to all sets when all sets hit the top of the rep range. In dynamic double progression, you add weight on a per set basis, where you only add weight to the set that actually hit the top end range. And some exercises can benefit from a more expanded rep range, so you don't only have to use the rep ranges I mentioned earlier. One of my favorite rep ranges is the 8 to 15 rep range. It's moderate enough to get a lot of volume, and progression is more sustainable. In contrast, if I were to do something like 5 to 15, the reason why I don't typically do that is because with a weight that I can do 5 reps with, it's probably somewhat heavy, and trying to build that up all the way to 15 reps is probably not going to be in my best interest. Either it's not going to be sustainable for my joints, or it's just going to be a waste of time in comparison to doing more volume with slightly more moderate weights. I'm able to hit failure while still accumulating much more volume. Another arbitrary rule that I have with my accessories is that I try to limit the amount of straight sets that I do. The reason I don't use straight sets on most accessories is because I like to take my accessories very close to failure or even slightly past it. If I hit 3 sets of 15 on my rope tricep extensions, my leg extensions, I'm probably going a bit too easy. This approach of trying to accumulate a lot of reps with straight sets is really good at building up your general work capacity and is a great way to slowly make progress. So it's incredibly valid, especially if you like to train further away from failure. And this is what you should be doing with your main lift or your supplementary exercises. But applying this to all of our accessory exercises, in my opinion, is one of the ways to demonstrate that we are not taking our accessories seriously. If you are going to be training to failure more often with your accessory exercises, this kind of approach would necessitate some kind of exercise rotation on a semi-frequent basis. If you're going to failure a lot of the time, you might be accumulating a lot more. If you are going to failure a lot of the time, you are going to be accumulating a lot of fatigue, and as a result, you might find yourself regressing or feeling some aches and pains. And one way to keep adaptations fresh is just to simply change the exercise. But there are times where you might want to stay further away from failure. All that matters is, does the method you are choosing, either going to failure or not going to failure, does it work for you? As long as it does, it's right. And when do I personally use straight sets on my accessories? It's generally when building up total work capacity or improving strength on that isolation is precisely the goal. So for example, I do this with 45-degree back extensions, barbell bicep curls, or even JM presses. On these exercises, simply going to failure is not my goal. I actually want to treat it almost as if it is a compound exercise and progress it in the same manner. But on other exercises like my tricep extensions, my preacher curls, my incline curls, my chest flies, me hitting 3 sets of 15 just communicates to me that I am not going to failure and I'm not training hard enough. Level 2, adding sets is the most impactful thing that you can do to your overall training volume. Think about your multiplication tables. 3 times 10 versus 3 times 11 is the difference between 30 and 33. But 3 times 10 versus 5 times 10 is a difference between you passing or failing the 3rd grade. When do I like to add sets? Adding sets can be a function of a properly utilized progression scheme, or it can simply be a form of auto-regulation where on some days you might hit more or you might hit less depending on what's in the tank. One of my favorite methods to utilize a set progression is to combine it with a rep goal and alternate it between weeks of 3 sets and 4 sets. The rep goal is the same regardless, but you only add weight when you're able to hit the rep goal on the 3-week set. So let's say your rep goal is 25. And on the first week where you're only doing 3 sets, you hit 8, 6, and 5. That's 19 total reps. You did not hit the rep goal. You know you should not add weight. On the 4-set week, you hit 25 by doing 8 reps, 6 reps, 6 reps, and 5 reps. So you hit the rep goal. You don't add weight unless on the next week where you are only doing 3 sets, you hit the rep goal. This allows me to alternate between weeks where I'm focusing on total rep accumulation and then I base my progression on the week where I'm trying to test my strength endurance. Alternatively, you can use an evolving set and rep range. You cap the total number of reps you do per set to the top end of the range, and when most of your sets are close to that top end, before we add more weight, we simply add another set. For example, if you are in the 8 to 15 range and you hit 15, 12, and 10 while being close to failure, let's say approximately 2 to 4 reps away from failure or closer, you can then add a 4th set with additional volume close to failure before you actually go up in weight. So now let's talk about level 3, intensity. You've added reps, you've added sets, now it's finally time to add weight. But there is another step that we can do that. In our space, intensity has two meanings. One is the more formal definition, and the other one is just how we typically understand intensity to be. In the more formal exercise science-y, bro scientist approach, intensity is percentage of your 1RM. This is one of the ways that you can make a set intrinsically difficult. The heavier the set is, the more difficult the set is. But this is not the only way to make a set intense. But in that situation, I'm more so talking about how we understand intensity in a more day-to-day, on-the-street level kind of a perspective. And that is quite simply how hard you make a set. How you perform a set, how much or how little momentum you use, how you position the weight, how fatigued you are when you enter into each set. All of these are methods that you can use to make a set more intense without adding more weight. There are techniques like drop sets, technical drop sets, myo reps, rest pause, which I think are the same thing as myo reps, but at this point I'm too afraid to ask. Running the rack, isometric holds, or even exaggerating the eccentric on some of your reps. You can do all this to get in additional work that is more intense without actually having to add weight. Some of these methods, in some contexts, may result in more fatigue than they do stimulus and growth, but that is up to you to decide after experimenting with them in your own training. In programming, some ways that I like to build these in is to use it as a finisher or even waive these intensity techniques. Let's say I take 3 weeks with a certain exercise, and on the first week, I simply do regular sets. I don't add any intensification techniques. I just do all 3 of my sets to close to or to failure. On week 2, I might add a drop set or multiple drop sets after my final set. And then on week 3, I might do rest pause where I keep the same amount of weight, but I try to rest maybe 10 to 30 seconds at most and try to do multiple additional sets on top of that. These are all ways that can keep your training fresh, and the options are endless. The last level is changing or adding exercises. Eventually, your body is going to adapt to what you throw at it. That means your sets, your reps, your volume, your intensities, and even the exercises you do. So adding in more exercises or changing the exercises slightly in your technique might be another way that you are able to actually progress in your exercises. This step will likely take a long time to be necessary, and you should rely on all the other things I mentioned before you get here. Alternatively, this method can be incredibly useful in phases where you want to specialize growing a certain muscle for a certain amount of time. In a standard program where building your chest is a goal of yours, you probably start with a pressing variation and then a fly variation. Over time, you add volume by adding in more sets and more reps, but instead of adding more sets in the exercises already in your program, you are able to add more sets by doing other exercises. So rather than adding a set on your bench press, maybe you decide to do a set of dumbbell bench pressing or incline dumbbell bench pressing or machine pressing. And instead of adding more sets on your, let's say, pec deck, you might decide to do a low cable fly or something of that nature. And either for time or for recovery, you might need to take volume away from other exercises. This technique is definitely more appropriate for the hypertrophy enthusiast, but be careful. By adding this in prematurely, you are just adding in junk volume. This is what you should be doing when you know for a fact you know how to train hard and you know what works for you. Simply trying to add in exercises to cover up your deficiencies in how hard you train is only going to end poorly, as you are just wasting your time. When you do need to reprioritize and redistribute your volume depending on what muscles need more work or how you need to bias the work for that muscle, that is where size and strength stop holding hands. Size and strength are very closely related to one another, and you do need to have them in your program if you are going to get the biggest you possibly want to. But at this point in time, this is where they diverge. One of them has to go off and live their truth, and they'll come back when they're ready after experiencing a lot of fun, but when they realize that there's no future prospect of stability, they come crying back to you. So I give you a lot of different concepts with a bunch of different examples, but the key idea here is this: have a progression plan. The contents of the plan are nowhere near as important as the actual presence of a plan. Now, that doesn't mean that a bad plan is equal to a good one. All I'm saying is that a bad plan is significantly better than having none. And more than likely, your first plan might be a bad one. But here's the cool thing. Training is a refinement process. So long as you have a plan, you can refine it in such a way that it becomes more and more effective the more times you run through it. So you won't be able to add weight to everything, or you will only be able to add weight slowly, but you can add reps, you can add sets, you can do intensity techniques, and when all else fails, you might have to examine your program and redistribute volume to exercises that better suit your goal. That is it for the video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and always remember, doing your best just means doing all that you can. Keep trying hard and start where you stand.